Rent. This is a part all of you probably are most concerned about. How do I know how much I'm gonna rent a place for? What if people don't pay? What if I can't get someone to move in? First thing I notice a lot of people ask is, hey, how do you know how much a place is gonna rent for? Well, it's pretty simple for us in our market. First of all, our property manager, she's super plugged in and she's watching constantly what's getting listed and what's getting filled on Zillow and the quality of that housing. I notice a lot of beginners will run rent comps and not even look at the quality of the housing that's getting rented. So they'll end up crunching their rent comps, comparing to luxury new builds and comparing it to their less than premium remodel. So if you're seeing new builds in your market renting for $1,500 and you're thinking you're gonna get $1,500 because it's same size, round down. Generally, that's how we figure out what somebody's gonna rent. I look at the quality of our housing compared to the quality of the housing that's on the market and what's getting filled. And if it matches, I average out based on square footage and bed bath. And if I feel like ours is lower, then I'll round down another 10 to 20% on what they're renting it for. Typically, if I have a place listed that I feel like I listed at the price that is both going off of square footage, bed bath, and quality, and I notice that it goes past 2 weeks with minimal inquiries, I'll drop it 10%. And generally, if you have it priced right, it should get filled in under 4 weeks. And after around 1 or 2 weeks, you should have a good amount of inquiries. If you're getting a lot of inquiries, but no one's really biting, your price is probably high. If you're not getting any inquiries, your price is definitely really high. As far as figuring out what to rent a property for, your best bet is to have a good property manager that's constantly plugged in and watching it and has a good feel for what they can rent things for. And then your next best thing is look at bed bath, square footage, comparables that are renting by using Zillow. You can see what's been rented, or you can use PropStream, and then compare the quality of your rental to that. And judging if yours is nicer, you can expect maybe a little bit more rent. If yours is worse, maybe a little bit lower. And that's what we do. And the thing about, if you're going really deep in one market, rent comps, figuring out what a place will rent for, eventually it'll be like second nature. You look at a place and you already know this will rent for X amount. We were pretty bad at rent comps in the beginning of investing in our market, and we should have spoken to a property manager in the area that knew, but instead we just, pride, ego, whatever, we thought we knew best. But now when we look at a place, I can say without even doing a Google search what it'll rent for, and I'm gonna be within 25 to 50 bucks. The things I'm checking the most in our portfolio as far as rent goes is collections and occupancy. Collections, occupancy, and then market rent. What do I mean by market rent? I'm comparing what our property manager is renting the places for versus what I thought the places should rent for. That is more so a metric for me keeping track of our property manager and making sure that our places are not being under rented, because if you don't, we have a good property manager. If you don't have a good property manager, they often will under rent places because they want places to get filled quicker and have less problems. But collections, okay. So depending on the class of real estate you have, collections is gonna vary. We find for most C-class real estate that you'll come across in the price points we talk about of like sub $150,000 homes, 85 to 92% collection rate if you average throughout the entire year. Meaning 85 to 92% of the time, people are gonna pay in full before the 15th, and roughly 5 to 20%, if it's really rough housing, you're gonna have people either paying late, partial payments, or missing payments. So generally, the nicer quality housing you go towards, collections are gonna be better. And if you do Section 8, collections are gonna be even better. Another great thing about Section 8 is you don't have to worry about tenant turnover as much, because Section 8 is competitive to get into Section 8 housing, and a lot of times when people get into housing, they don't want to get out. Turnover. Multi-unit housing is gonna have higher tenant turnover, and typically smaller setups like 1 beds, 2 beds are gonna have higher tenant turnover because people are less likely to be living there long term. Single family houses, 3 bed, 2 baths, 2 bed, 2 baths, typically have lower turnover because people are moving there for more long-term setups. They have kids, family, whereas apartment housing, think about the apartments you've lived in or places you've lived in. People move in apartments temporarily. Typically, we don't have people staying in 1 beds for more than a year. Every time someone moves out, you gotta do a make ready. It's gonna cost you. People do not always leave places ready to go. And whenever turnover happens, you have both vacancy and repairs. So Turnover is extremely important for you to factor in if you're deciding to buy a duplex, quadplex, or multi-unit. And that's why we are so in love with single family houses, because people move in and they stay there for more than a year. We have some tenants who have lived in the same property for 10 years, which is amazing. That means our occupancy rate is 100% if you just selected a 5-year block. And with no tenant turnover, you don't have to worry about places sitting vacant. When places are vacant, that's where you get break-ins and you get problems. So there's a lot of hype around multi-unit housing, but if we're looking at these metrics and we throw in turnover as well, multi-unit housing that have higher turnover, lower collections, unless it's nicer stuff, occupancy rate is going to be lower because typically multi-unit housing, your occupancy rate is going to be at 90% tops. And then market rent, again, people don't like to live in multi-unit housing. Like a 2-bed multi-unit unit is not going to rent as much as a 2-bed single family house. People want houses. The housing market's expensive. It's expensive to buy a house. People want to live in houses. Occupancy. So depending on the class of real estate you should have, occupancy rate, I would factor in 5 to 15% of the time a property being vacant. If it's in worse quality housing and it's multi-unit, vacant occupancy rate is going to be lower. But if it's a nice single family house, 5% of the time will be vacant. Now to factor this into your running your numbers on a property, occupancy rate, if it's lower quality housing, just subtract out 15% of the monthly rent to figure out the expense of occupancy. And then same thing with collections. Multiply the monthly rent by say 10 or 20% and subtract that out from the total monthly rent. Section 8. So we love Section 8, but we are not tunnel vision on Section 8. We have a sheet for our market that shows bed, bath, and square footage and what Section 8 will pay. And we use that a lot of times to see how hard we're going to push for getting Section 8. Sometimes the market will pay more, sometimes Section 8 will pay more. And we look at that and we discuss with our property manager, and if it's going to be minimal time and effort to get it approved Section 8, we always go Section 8. If it's going to be a lot of time and effort and we don't even think it's going to be able to rent for much more than Section 8, we'll pass on it. The key of Section 8 is having a property manager that is good at Section 8, that knows who to talk to, knows who does the inspections, because what you'll find is if you go out and try to do it your own, it's really slow as far as working with different housing authorities. And if you don't know, it's kind of like a who's who type of situation in our experience. I got nowhere Section 8, our property manager like that as far as approving stuff for Section 8. But again, Section 8 is not always your best option. Sometimes you can rent places for much more. So I recommend you network with a property manager that has experience in Section 8 and get a sheet so you can compare roughly what your place would rent for on Section 8. Section 8 is great because that takes care of your collections and occupancy. People move in and they stay. Collections, most of it's getting paid for by the government, so you don't got to worry there. KPIs to watch. Every Wednesday, I check what is our occupancy, collections. So throughout the month, I see we should have about 70% of the rent collected by the 10th, and then about 85% by the 15th, and then the rest between the 15th and 25th. This month, we're sitting at about 70% collected, and it's only the 6th, so that's a great month for us. But also backdating collections. So if you want to look at the last month and compare cash versus accrual, which is basically comparing cash versus cash collected versus what rent should have been. So you'll want to look at a full 30-day period for the previous month. What was rent roll? What were we owed in rent versus what we collected? The smaller the discrepancy, the better job your property manager is doing. If you see, say, rent roll with $30,000 and your property manager collected $20,000, you have a problem. If rent roll is $30,000 and they collected $28,000, they're doing a good job. So that though, typically you got to look at a 30-day time frame, because if you're looking at it for the month, they're not going to have all the rent collected by the 15th. So it's really important that you backdate and look at that 30-day periods. How much rent was owed, how much was collected, and that's how you make sure your property manager is doing their job. Occupancy. You should never see your occupancy dip below 80% after you get stabilized. That's another thing I check every week, seeing that they're getting places filled, and I'll also check listings. If a place has been listed for over 2 weeks, I'll poke and be like, hey, should we lower the price on this place? Is it getting movement? And the market rent, I'm just auditing, making sure that our property manager is filling places at market rent. That's the biggest stuff for property management. I would say if you have less than 10 doors, a monthly meeting is enough with your property manager where you check those things. Again, big emphasis on rent roll versus what is actually collected. And then this is kind of getting into later stuff, but auditing work orders. I'll get into that in the next section. If you have more than 10 doors, I recommend a weekly meeting to touch base on things and just be checking these items, because at the end of the day, you got to be collecting rent to keep leveraging up and doing the BRRRR method.